Flesh and Thread, a Resident Evil Village fanfic, by just one more chapter. Disclaimer: this will be a GXG love story. If this makes you uncomfortable, then simply don't listen. I will be trying to keep this as close to canon as I can whilst including my own story. With that being said, I do not own any of the canon characters featuring in this story, only my OC. This will be taking place a few years before the events of Resident Evil 8, so please enjoy. Chapter 1: Breaking Point. The cold stone walls of Castle Dimitrescu seemed to close in around Jane as she sprinted down the dimly lit corridors. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step echoing through the halls like a death march. The sounds of her pursuers' footsteps grew closer, too close. She could hear them. The cruel laughter, the sharp voices of the Dimitrescu daughters, taunting her, hunting her.
"Don't think you can escape, little maid."
Daniela's voice echoed, sickly sweet but laced with malice. Jane's eyes flickered to the shadows, her breath ragged. She couldn't afford to look back. Not now. Every twist and turn of the castle was a blur of stone, wood, and danger. Her mind raced, searching for an escape. But the castle seemed to shift around her, a maze designed to trap her. The oppressive atmosphere, the echo of her own breath, the almost suffocating silence between the insults and shrieks from her pursuers, felt like the walls themselves were closing in. She had been working as a maid in Lady Dimitrescu's estate, for what felt like forever, cleaning, serving, hiding her fear beneath the veneer of obedience. But there was always an undercurrent of dread, a whispering voice in her head warning her that one day, her life would no longer be her own. It had come to that. The daughters, with their twisted games and cruelty, had decided that Jane was expendable. They'd made their moves. They were out for blood. Her blood. A scream tore through the air. Too close. Jane's heart skipped. They were so close. She rounded another corner, her hand grazing the stone as if the walls might somehow provide solace or direction. But the castle, like its master, seemed indifferent to her struggles. She reached a tall window, a faint glimmer of moonlight beckoning her like a distant promise of freedom. But she couldn't stop, she couldn't let herself hesitate for even a second.
"Don't look back. Don't look back."
She repeated the mantra, her legs burning as she pushed herself harder, faster, desperate to outrun the nightmare that had become her reality.
"Run, little maid. You can't outrun us."
Cassandra's voice was a growl, a low threat that sent chills crawling down Jane's spine. She didn't look back, but she could almost feel the cold fingers of Cassandra's cruel touch at her neck. They were getting closer. Turning another corner, she collided with a heavy wooden door, her hands shaking as she fumbled to push it open. The door creaked loudly, the sound like a death knell, but it gave her an opening, her only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, she darted through, the door slamming shut behind her. Her breath caught in her throat as she pressed her back to the cold wood, heart racing, listening to the echoes of footsteps on the other side. For a brief moment there was silence. Then, a sharp, mocking laugh broke the stillness.
"You can't hide forever, Jane."
Bella's voice purred.
"We'll find you. We always do."
The dread that had settled in Jane's stomach became a solid weight, but she couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't afford to break. If she did, if they caught her, there would be no going back. Her eyes scanned the room. It was a small chamber, sparsely decorated but oddly quiet, with a single ornate door at the far side. She could hear faint noises from outside, the scrape of nails against stone, the whispers of her pursuers as they circled, knowing she couldn't escape. This was a dead end, but maybe, Just maybe, it wasn't. The moonlight spilled through the small window on the far wall, casting long, twisted shadows. Jane didn't hesitate. She ran toward it, her heart a frantic drumbeat, praying that what lay beyond this door wasn't just another trap. Her fingers brushed against the cold handle of the door. It was unlocked. Her breath caught in her throat. She yanked it open, slipping into the dark corridor beyond with barely a moment to spare. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of dust and damp stone. She could hear nothing now but her own breathing, too loud, too harsh in the silence. She took a moment to collect herself, her hands trembling as she pressed against the walls for support. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Jane's pulse shot up. The daughters had found her again. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep running. She needed an escape somewhere. Anywhere that could take her out of the suffocating nightmare that had become her life. But with each passing moment, the walls of Castle Dimitrescu seemed to close in even more. A small light flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow down a far hallway. Jane's breath caught. It wasn't much, but it was something. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward it. But as she rounded the corner, the unexpected happened. The air shifted, colder now. The estate had changed. For the first time, she wasn't running from the Dimitrescu daughters. She was running towards something new. The lights from the distant corridor flickered again, and Jane, desperate, took a step into the unknown. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her, with a finality that felt like a weight lifting off her chest. Jane's lungs burned, her breath turning to icy mist as she sprinted into the night. The snow greeted her like a slap to the face, its cold bite a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat she had just fled. She stumbled on the icy ground, nearly falling, but she pushed herself to keep moving. She had to. There was no time to rest. The grounds of Castle Dimitrescu stretched out before her, dark and cold, the once grand estate now looming in the distance behind her. The towering castle and its looming spires were a reminder of everything she was leaving behind. A reminder of the nightmare she had narrowly escaped.
They can't follow me out here. Not in this cold.
The snow was falling heavily, covering the ground in a thick blanket that glittered under the pale moonlight. The wind howled through the trees, biting at her exposed skin. Jane's pale face, already drawn from exhaustion, seemed to glow against the backdrop of snow. Her dark hair a tangled mess, weighed down with flakes as it whipped around her face. She could feel the icy sting on her cheeks, the harsh cold seeping through her worn shoes. But it was nothing compared to the suffocating, toxic air inside the castle. She glanced over her shoulder for the first time since her escape, and heard it faintly, but unmistakably. A scream, sharp and frantic, slicing through the night.
Mother! She's escaped! The maid has escaped!
Daniela's voice shrieked, and Jane's blood ran cold. Her pursuers were still too close for comfort. But they wouldn't follow her out here. Not in this snow, not in the cold. The sisters were too bound to the castle's warmth to venture into the bitter wilderness that now surrounded her. With the sound of Daniela's angry cry still echoing in her ears, Jane pushed forward. She didn't stop to look back, didn't let herself falter. The ground beneath her was treacherous, the snow and ice thickening the further she went. But she pressed on, one foot in front of the other. Her long, dark hair clung to her cheeks, frozen with the moisture from the air. Her maid's dress hanging limply from her slight frame. The fabric, once neat and pristine, was now torn and stained, both a symbol of her captivity and her desperate fight for survival. Her green eyes, bright despite the exhaustion and fear, scanned the snowy horizon. She needed to keep moving. She heard them again, faint voices calling to each other. Their footsteps still distant but unmistakably there. She couldn't afford to slow down. She needed to find a way out, away from this cursed estate. The woods were ahead. They might offer the refuge she so desperately needed. The forest, dark and silent, beckoned her like an unknown, unwelcoming friend. The light from the castle was now far behind, and Jane could feel the isolation settling over her. She was alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was truly alone. Her breath hitched as the cold air pierced through her lungs, but she forced herself to ignore the pain. The woods were ahead. There was a light in the distance, barely visible through the trees. Hope, she thought, pushing her legs to carry her faster. For the first time since her escape, a flicker of hope stirred within her. As Jane pressed forward into the biting cold, her mind raced. She pushed through the snow, the world around her a blur of white and shadow. The frigid wind howled in her ears, but it did little to drown out the thoughts that plagued her heart. The other maids? She felt a pang of guilt as she imagined them still trapped inside the castle, enduring the cruel and unforgiving wrath of Lady Dimitrescu's daughters. They would bear the brunt of her escape. She could already hear the shrill voices of the sisters echoing in her mind, the threats, the punishments that would surely follow.
They will be punished for my escape.
She couldn't stop thinking of them. How they had served in silence, how they had hidden their fear behind a mask of obedience, just as she had. And now, because of her, they would face the consequences. There was no escaping that fate. Her stomach twisted at the thought of their suffering. How many more would be lost, dragged into the nightmare that was the Dimitrescu estate? How many had already fallen victim to Lady Dimitrescu's insatiable thirst for power and cruelty? Jane's escape might be a fleeting hope for herself, but for them, it was just another day of torment. And Alcina, the name of the lady of the castle, sent a cold shiver down her spine, colder than the snow swirling around her. Alcina Dimitrescu, the monstrous woman who had once seemed untouchable, beyond the reach of anyone's rebellion. Jane had seen the terrifying power in her eyes, and she knew it well. There was no escaping that kind of wrath. The thought made Jane's chest tighten with a cold, suffocating fear. Alcina was not someone who let such things slide. Not after everything she had done to build her twisted, eerie kingdom. Jane had no doubt that the lady would find a way to track her down, to punish her perhaps even worse than the others. She thought of being dragged back to the castle, of enduring whatever cruel fate Alcina had in store for her, was enough to drive Jane to run faster, even if her legs felt as if they might collapse beneath her. Her green eyes darted nervously through the woods ahead. The dense trees loomed like dark sentinels, their twisted branches swaying ominously in the wind. The forest was no comfort. If anything, it was another trap, another danger waiting in the shadows. And then there were the lichens. Jane had heard the rumors, the stories whispered in the dead of night by the other servants, always speaking in hushed tones about the beasts that roamed the woods, the horrific, monstrous creatures that stalked the outskirts of the castle. Jane had never seen one up close, but the terror that came with the stories was palpable, the way the air grew thick with the scent of death when they were near. Are they already out there? Her heart skipped a beat. The thought of those creatures lurking in the darkness, hunting her, made her breath catch. She had no way of knowing how close they might be, but she couldn't afford to slow down and find out. The lichens were faster, stronger, and far more deadly than any threat she had faced inside the castle. She had escaped one nightmare, but it seemed like the woods might be filled with others.
But what choice do I have?
She thought grimly. She could either keep running, Keep fighting to stay ahead of whatever came after her, or give up? The choice seemed clear. She pushed onward, her legs aching with exhaustion, her breath shallow in her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing remained certain. She could never go back. Not to the castle, not to the life she had known. Whatever lay ahead in the unknown forest, she had to face it. For herself, for the other maids, for the hope of escaping Alcina's grasp. With every step she took deeper into the woods, she knew the danger was only beginning. And that's the end of chapter 1. Thank you for listening to just one more chapter. If you're enjoying so far, please feel free to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this story. I have plenty more chapters and fanfics from other fandoms in the works. Until then, just one more chapter.